Right, hi everybody. I think the final people are just coming in from the lobby now. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, talking about our funding call on improving equality, diversity and inclusion within publicly funded modern slavery research in the UK. I'm Izzy Templer. I'm the Research Operation and Communications Manager at the Modern Slavery PEC, and you'll be meeting some of my colleagues throughout today's presentation. Just going to kick off with a quick bit of housekeeping. So the first thing to know is that we just ask that you all keep your microphones on mute and your videos off until the networking session at the end of today's meeting. But please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask us questions or let us know if you're having any technical problems, if you can't hear us, any problems like that throughout the call. And we've got a Q&A section at the end of the meeting where we'll pick up any questions there. We are recording the webinar today and we'll share it online afterwards. We'll record everything up to the networking session, but we won't share anything from the Q&A onwards online. We're just recording that for our note-taking purposes. And what we'll do is produce a written FAQ document. So we'll have all the answers to any questions from today or that have been sent to us by email in one place on our website that you can access. Just going to start off with some meeting rules. We just have these in place as we appreciate that people with lived experience of modern slavery may be in attendance at our meetings. So we ask that everybody is sensitive and respectful and not to ask any participants about their experiences of modern slavery. Disclosure isn't required to be involved in modern slavery PEC work. So please don't feel that you need to make any disclosures, but also be mindful that you might hear some disclosures during the networking portion of today's session. Be respectful of people's wishes around terminology. At the Modern Slavery PEC, we use the term people with lived experience and survivors based on our work that we've done so far, but just please listen to others and their preferred terminology and try to be amenable to that. Some individuals might choose to remain anonymous during today's meeting, meaning that they don't put their cameras on or have a display name. In particular, during the networking portion today, please just make sure that these individuals are still included as part of conversations. But also be mindful of your own mental health. Please feel free to take breaks as needed. Feel free to step away momentarily or to leave the meeting if you feel the discussion is worrying you at any point. So for today's meeting, we're going to spend about half an hour introducing the PEC, talking through the funding call and our application process. Then we'll do a Q&A, followed by the networking session, and I'll touch on some more details about that as we get nearer to them. So to start off with, I'm going to hand over to Alex Belch to talk about an introduction to the Modern Slavery PEC.
Thanks, Izzy. My name is Alex Belch. I'm Director of Research at the Modern Slavery PEC, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through of who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Next slide, please. So we are a consortium of 6 partner institutions. We have funding of 10 million. And we're put together to do 2 main things. The first one is to improve the quality of the research around modern slavery, but secondly is to transform how well policies work to address that problem. So it's about that twin mission of improving quality of research and improving the quality of the laws and policies to address it. Next slide, please. So we're made up of 6 partner institutions, and these are all universities or research institutions based in the UK. I won't go through all of them, but just to see the logos there, and just to mention that we are ourselves funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, supported by the Economic and Social Research Council. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned that we are here to improve research and to improve policies. So how do we do that, and what do we actually do to make that happen? Well, we do a lot of what we call co-developing, and I'll talk a bit more about our co-development approach later. So it's all about working with partners and collaborating with partners in order to improve the quality of research and to address the gaps in evidence. So what do we need to know about modern slavery, and how can we better fill those gaps through high quality research? Now, once we've done that, that's not the end of the story. We need to then translate that evidence and that knowledge to make sure that it's used and usable by policymakers and decision makers. So a lot of what we do is actually about facilitating communication between different parts of the sector. So talking between researchers and policymakers, businesses and practitioners, building bridges. And one of the most important things in that work is about inclusivity and equity. So it's about how can we make that a fairer process involving more people in research and in that translation work. And that's why we're here today to talk about this work on improving equality, diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please. So we have sort of three main ways that we actually fund research. The first one is an open research call. One of those actually finished a few months ago, and that's where we actually invite proposals and research teams can suggest or propose their own research ideas and research projects, and then we select the best through an open and transparent process. Then we have what we have today, the second of those bullet points, which is responsive research, which is where we're actually talking to people who are in the sector about what they feel the most urgent needs are, and then we're selecting the best ideas and then funding research to do that. So where we are today, it really comes back to our consultation with the sector, which took place in 2020, where we actually asked all the people we could make contact with what was the most urgent and pressing need for research. And what came loud and clear from that was that research needs to be more inclusive. It needs to include a greater range of people in the actual research itself. And there are problems in terms of barriers that are preventing certain people from getting involved in the research around modern slavery. And that does seem to affect the quality of the research that is produced. So responsive research, for example, today is about responding to that need to understand better why we're not so inclusive and why there's problems of equality and diversity. So the third mechanism is about partner-led work strands, and that's where we look to our partner institutions, and they help us to develop evidence reviews and lay the foundation, which helps us again identify gaps in research. Next slide, please. So what do? We actually have four main areas of work, and they're written there: prevention, survivor support, supply chains, and the effectiveness of legal enforcement. And all this is on our website, so I won't go into too much detail, but I would just point to the fact that there are sort of cross-cutting and emerging issues that we also fund. For example, we did an urgent call on the impact of COVID-19 on modern slavery, and also we have sort of cross-cutting themes or guiding principles which inform all our work, which is first of all that all our work should really be looking at what is effective, what works. Secondly, that we need to be equitable in the way that we do our research, so we need to consider how we're speaking to problems of inequality and unfairness in both how research is done, but also in what sort of things we do research on. And then finally, that we have survivor involvement in our research, because we understand the importance of lived experience, not just as participants in research, but as actually determining and driving the research itself. Next slide, please. So how we work. I mentioned earlier that we talked about co-development a lot. I know it's co-development and co-design is sometimes an overused terms, but just to give you a flavour of how we do our co-design and co-creation, we reach out to our stakeholders on a regular basis, and we did a consultation in 2020, which is a more systematic way of doing this, where we actually gather research ideas and we gather perceptions of what is needed in order to begin the process of co-designing research funding calls. We then actually include people with lived experience in that co-design process, and that continues through the selection and through the working with research teams. So we see this as a collaborative process that is sort of from the beginning to the end of the research project. So from the point where we're designing the call to the selection to actually working with those research teams that are successfully funded. So if you are successful in getting funding from the Modern Slavery PEC, we'll be working together. We'll be collaborating throughout the research process. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. I'm finished. So I think I hand back now to Nikki, who's going to talk about the research call.
Yeah, great. Hi everyone. I'm Nikki Calavides. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Manager at the PEC. So we're going to talk you through now the main elements of the research that we'd like to commission. Do you mind moving it along? Thank you. So to set a bit of context about why we're doing this, the rationale for the call comes from our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion, as Alex has set out. We think it's really vital to our work that people with different characteristics and experiences and backgrounds and expertise have equal access to our opportunities, not just in the context of the legally protected characteristics, but also making sure that people with lived experience of modern slavery and others who represent or provide support or are affected by it are included in the work we do. And as a research funder, we're also really interested in ensuring our opportunities are offered to a diversity of those within academia, including people at different career stages and from different disciplines. So we're really seeking to embed inclusive practices across all our work, our operations, the research we fund, the networks that we participate in and develop, and all the activities we deliver. So last month we published our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy and Action Plan, which set out 4 priority aims and the activities that we want to do to deliver those. And this research call is one of those 4 aims that we've set out. So obviously greater EDI is not only an important thing to do in and of itself, but we think a broader range of insights and perspectives will also improve the quality and the impact on policy and lawmaking. There are long-standing issues of equality and inclusion in modern slavery research, as Alex said, highlighted in feedback to our consultation in 2020, and others in the sector have identified it as well. So BASNet, the UK BME anti-slavery network, have found that modern slavery and human trafficking research is really insufficiently informed by people affected by modern slavery, including people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So recognising this evidence gap on the scale and nature of EDI in modern slavery research, we've launched this responsive research call to try and look into this. And we'd like to fund 1 project in this call with a maximum budget of 80,000. Next slide, please. This slide sets out the aim and the objectives of the project. So overall, we want the research to shed light on and assess the diversity of those funding, designing, undertaking and participating in modern slavery research. And we particularly want it to produce recommendations for funders like us and others working on modern slavery research, so that we can ensure we're doing the best we can to be inclusive in the way we work with all groups and individuals. There are 3 main objectives for the research. The first is to generate new data and insights on EDI within modern slavery research and use this to identify the most significant challenges and opportunities. This would focus on legally protected characteristics, but we'd really like consideration to be given to how it correlates with wider EDI priorities. So the inclusion of people with lived experience, as we've talked about, and the inclusion of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, academic disciplines, career stages, and also those outside of academia. The second objective is to identify examples of best practice and assess their effectiveness and impact. We would like that to include examples of where diverse groups or individuals are equitably included, but also the innovative or other methods that are used to include them and why they work. Finally, we want the research to provide really detailed, comprehensive, and most importantly, implementable recommendations with resources where required based on these data insights and the examples of best practice. And the audience for this is research funders like us and others working in the sector. Though we have limited the scope of this to diversity within publicly funded modern slavery research in the UK, we are interested in best practice examples from other research areas or international experiences or other types of research if they're relevant to this scope of this project. Wider structural or systemic EDI challenges relating to the kind of overall research sector, we're hoping should only be addressed if there's a specific relevance and applicability to modern slavery research in the scope of this project. My final slide summarises what we're looking for in project proposals. So the main elements of the research we want, firstly, a quantitative assessment of diversity within modern slavery research, and we're particularly interested here in new data collection or analysis that you're proposing to address potential data gaps. We'd also like proposals to include a qualitative element, research and data collection from an appropriate number and range, diversity of stakeholders on the barriers, the challenges and the opportunities. We'd like the research to include an assessment of an appropriate number of EDI initiatives already in the sector, identifying maybe 5 to 10 best practice examples. And in the proposal, we're really keen to understand your criteria for assessing the interventions and the proposed methodologies for assessing impact. The purpose of all of this research is to produce evidence-based recommendations for the PEC and others working in the sector. If you are proposing other stakeholders, we'd really like to see who and what your rationale is for those groups as well. Because of the nature of this project, it's really important for us to understand the project governance of your team, including the expertise on equality, diversity and inclusion. And finally, consideration should be given to meaningful inclusion of people with lived experience in all areas of the research, including the design and implementation. So that covers the basics of what we'd like to see in project proposals. The call document sets out the criteria we're going to use to assess the applications, and there's time for questions about the content also in the Q&A. I'll now pass to Izzy to give more details on the application process.
Thanks very much, Nikki. So I'm going to talk through the application process for this funding call quickly. A lot of this information is in the call document, so it's always a really good place to refer back to if you have questions, and also I'll give the details for our email at the end of today's presentation. So firstly, just having a quick look at the timelines. The first key date to look at here is the 16th of June at 4 p.m. This is the deadline for this funding call. We can't accept any late applications on this call. It will close at 4 p.m. So please make sure that you sort of factor into your timing, make sure you leave good time to complete the form and get it submitted. We'll be getting decisions to the successful team in early July, looking for a project to start in early August. We'll look for the project to deliver a draft of their final report and research summary in January of 2023. And this is because sort of over the next 6 to 8 weeks, so throughout the remainder of January and February, you'll be collaborating really closely with the Modern Slavery PEC on sort of refining this report and research summary, doing your policy impact activities and any communications work that comes out as a result of your project. And then we'll be looking for the final outputs and final delivery of the project at the end of February next year. In terms of eligibility, projects need to be led by either a UK higher education institute, a UKRI approved research organisation, or a charity registered in the UK with a focus on modern slavery or EDI. Project teams do need to have an element of collaboration between an academic or research organisation and a UK-based third sector organisation. You'll see in the call document that we refer to principal and co-investigators, and basically what this means, the principal investigator is the lead researcher. They'll be based at the lead organisation that's hosting the grant, and they'll have project management responsibility for ensuring that you meet all the milestones of your project and sort of communicating any changes with the PEC. Co-investigators are the researchers who work alongside this principal investigator to complete the work of the project. So they can be based at any of the organisations taking part, and they'll really collaborate with the principal researcher to ensure the delivery of the project. And as we mentioned earlier, in your application, we'll really look for you to set out what role each one of these individuals will have in the project so we can understand how the team works, will be working together. So we request that if you're a principal or co-investigator on one application, you can't apply then on another application. This only applies to you as an individual. So if, for example, a university had 2 or 3 academics who are all interested in applying to the call as principal investigators, that's fine. A university or a research organisation or a UK-based charity can apply multiple times, but the individual who's listed as the researcher on the project will only be able to apply once. In terms of the funding available, we have a maximum budget of £80,000 at 100% full economic cost. So again, you'll see full economic cost and or FEC, as it's sometimes shortened to, popping up on various different documents relating to this funding call. Basically what it means is the full cost of the research. So the research, you will have had to spend £80,000 on it. The reason why this is important and we mention it is because UK higher education institutes and approved research organisations receive their funding at 80% of FEC. So for every £1 they spend, the Modern Slavery PEC reimburses them 80p, whereas UK-based third sector organisations and international organisations taking part in this call will be funded at 100% FEC. So that means that for every £1 they spend, the Modern Slavery PEC will reimburse them £1. So it's just important to know, really, for the higher education institutes and research organisations when they're putting their budget together. So don't worry too much if you see that sort of terminology flying about. As we mentioned earlier, we're expecting to fund one project for this work. UK-based third sector organisations can apply for up to 50% of the project's budget, and international organisations can apply for up to 30% of the project's budget. But the combined UK third sector and international costs can account for no more than 50% of the total budget for this project. So I've got some examples which hopefully will demonstrate that for you. These are also available on the call webpage if you want to see them in slightly bigger text. So in scenario 1, you can see we've got one university. They have 55% of the research budget. They then have one charity partner and one international partner, and between the two of them, they have 45% of the budget. They're falling below that 50% threshold. In scenario 2, there are 2 universities taking part. Between the two of them, they have 52% of the budget. And then there are 2 charity partners who have 48% of the budget between them. So again, they're falling underneath that 50% threshold. So these are both eligible budgets. The one thing that I would flag is that in your final budget, we'd like to see everything broken down item by items. This is just for illustrative purposes, but we want to see a lot of detail when you submit your final budget. What we'd ask is that if you have any questions around your budget and if it's eligible and meeting these percentages, that you put that in an email to us at office@modernslaverypec.org, where we'll be able to have a look and let you know if it's eligible. What we won't do is comment on if it's sort of a good budget or not, based on sort of what the panel might decide, but we will be able to give you sort of a yes or no answer as to whether you've met this eligibility criteria. But if you think you're going to need to do that, please make sure you leave plenty of time to send us this email, so it's not happening sort of the day before your final application needs to be submitted, because we will need some time within the PEC to be able to look through these and offer you that feedback. That brings us to the end of our presentation section for today, and we'll move on to the Q&A.